Maya Chen walked through the crowded hallways of New Geneva University like a ghost. Students pushed past her without a second glance, their conversations about weekend parties and upcoming exams flowing around her, as if she wasn't there. At 19, she had perfected the art of invisibility. Short and slight, with black hair that hung like a curtain over half her face, she moved through campus life without making a single ripple. She preferred it that way. The lecture hall buzzed with pre-class chatter as Maya slipped into her usual seat in the back corner. Professor Williams was setting up his holographic display for today's lesson on interstellar conflicts. Maya's fingers unconsciously traced the thin scar that ran from her left temple to her jawline, hidden beneath her hair. Most people assumed it was from some childhood accident. They were wrong. Today we'll be discussing the Kepler 442 incident, Professor Williams announced, his voice cutting through the noise. One of humanity's most controversial military engagements in recent history. Maya's blood turned to ice. Her hands clenched into fists under the desk, knuckles white against her dark skin. She had hoped this day would never come. The holographic display flickered to life, showing star maps and battle formations. Maya recognized every ship, every tactical position. She had been there when those formations broke apart under alien fire. She had been there when good people died screaming in the void. The conflict began when human colonists on Kepler 442b discovered they weren't alone. The professor continued. The Zephyrians had been using the planet as a staging ground for territorial expansion. What followed was 18 months of brutal warfare. A student in the front row raised her hand. Professor, wasn't that conflict illegal under the Galactic Accords? Humans weren't supposed to engage in military action without coalition approval. Williams nodded gravely. That's correct, Sarah. The Earth Defense Force acted unilaterally. Many consider it humanity's first true war crime in space. Maya bit her tongue so hard she tasted blood. War crime. They called it a war crime to defend innocent families from beings who saw humans as nothing more than pests, to be exterminated. The professor had never seen a Zephyrian plasma cannon reduce a school full of children to ash in seconds. He had never held a dying friend while their life leaked out through holes in their environmental suit. The lecture continued with clinical detachment. Charts showed casualty numbers reduced to mere statistics. Maya remembered every face behind those numbers. Lieutenant Rodriguez, who used to show everyone pictures of his newborn daughter. Sergeant Park, who made terrible jokes to keep morale up during the siege of New Haven Colony. Commander Chen, no relation despite the shared surname, who had given the order that saved 3,000 civilian lives at the cost of his own. The human forces were eventually victorious, Williams said, clicking to the next slide. But at tremendous cost. The Zephyrian homeworld was essentially sterilized. It remains one of the darkest chapters in human military history. A student near Maya spoke up. How could humans be so savage? The reports say our soldiers showed no mercy even to non-combatants. Maya's chair scraped against the floor as she stood abruptly. Every eye in the lecture hall turned toward her. For the first time in 3 years of university, Maya Chen was visible. You don't know what you're talking about, she said, her voice barely above a whisper but carrying clearly in the sudden silence. Professor Williams looked surprised. Miss Chen? Do you have something to add? Maya's heart hammered against her ribs. She could feel the weight of every stare, every curious gaze. The careful invisibility she had cultivated was cracking like ice under pressure. The Zephyrians didn't have non-combatants, she continued, her voice growing stronger. Their entire society was militaristic. Every adult was a warrior. Every child was trained to kill from the moment they could hold a weapon. The student who had spoken before turned in his seat. That's just propaganda to justify genocide. Everyone knows. Everyone knows nothing, Maya snapped, surprising herself with the venom in her voice. You read sanitized reports written by politicians who are nowhere near the fighting. You think you understand war because you've seen documentaries and read academic papers. Professor Williams frowned. Miss Chen, while I appreciate your passion, we should stick to documented facts. Maya laughed, a bitter sound that made several students shift uncomfortably. Documented facts, right. She reached up and swept her hair back, fully revealing the scar that marked the left side of her face. Gasps echoed through the lecture hall. Maya Chen, service number HDF 7742 Delta, she said formally. Corporal 3rd Battalion, Kepler Defense Corps. I was there, Professor. I was on the ground when the Zephyrians came. I watched them burn entire settlements just to test their new weapons. I helped pull survivors from the rubble of hospitals they targeted specifically because they were marked with medical symbols. The lecture hall had gone completely silent. Professor Williams stared at her with his mouth slightly open. Maya realized she was shaking. Whether from fear or rage, she couldn't tell. The youngest soldier in my unit was barely 18, she continued. The oldest was 63. We weren't professional killers. We were farmers and mechanics and teachers who picked up rifles because the alternative was watching our families die. And when it was over, when we had finally stopped the Zephyrian advance, the same government that had abandoned us to die called us war criminals for surviving. She gathered her books with movements that were too quick, too sharp. You want to study the Kepler 442 incident, Professor? Try reading the after-action reports from the soldiers who were actually there. Try looking at the medical records from the refugee camps. Try explaining to a 5-year-old why her parents aren't coming home. Maya turned and walked toward the exit, her footsteps echoing in the absolute silence. At the door, she paused and looked back at the sea of shocked faces. Class dismissed, she said quietly, and stepped out into the hallway. Behind her, she could hear the explosion of whispered conversations beginning. Her secret was out now. The invisible girl had become visible in the worst possible way. Maya leaned against the corridor wall and closed her eyes, wondering if she had just made the biggest mistake of her life. She had no idea that her words had been heard by more than just her classmates. In the back of the lecture hall, someone had been recording everything. Maya's apartment was a fortress of solitude. Bare walls, minimal furniture, and blackout curtains that kept the world at bay. She had chosen the smallest unit in the cheapest building near campus, a place where neighbors minded their own business and landlords asked no questions. It was perfect for someone who wanted to disappear, but disappearing was no longer an option. She sat cross-legged on her narrow bed, staring at her old service tablet. She hadn't powered it on in 3 years, hadn't wanted to face the memories it contained. Now her finger hovered over the activation switch. Professor Williams had asked for documented facts. Maybe it was time someone heard the real story. The tablet hummed to life, its military-grade encryption still intact. Maya's reflection stared back at her from the black screen for a moment before the interface loaded. Immediately, notification icons flooded the display. Messages from old squad mates, updates from the Veterans Administration, and dozens of news alerts about Kepler 442 that she had never opened. The most recent alert made her blood run cold. The headline read, "Zephyrian Survivors Demand War Crimes Tribunal for Human Military Leaders." Maya's hands shook as she opened the article. According to the report, newly discovered Zephyrian refugees had come forward with testimonies about human atrocities during the conflict. They described massacres, the targeting of civilians, and the complete destruction of their homeworld. The Coalition Senate was considering formal charges. What they didn't mention was that these testimonies came from Zephyrians who had been in deep space during the entire conflict, returning only after it was over. They hadn't witnessed the systematic slaughter of human colonies, the use of chemical weapons against children, or the Zephyrian practice of taking prisoners only to use them as target practice. A soft knock at her door made Maya jump. She quickly shut off the tablet and checked the time. Nearly midnight. No one should be visiting her, especially not at this hour. Through the peephole, she saw a young man about her age standing in the hallway. Tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of confident posture that suggested military training. Maya didn't recognize him, but something about the way he stood triggered her combat instincts. "Maya Chen?" he called softly. "My name is David Park. I think we need to talk." The surname hit her like a physical blow. Park. Sergeant Danny Park, who had died in her arms during the Battle of Meridian Pass, who had spent his last breath asking her to tell his little brother that he was sorry for missing his graduation. Maya opened the door but kept the security chain attached. "What do you want?" David's face was serious, older than his years. "Danny was my brother. I was in the audience today when you spoke in Professor Williams' class. Someone recorded it and posted it online." "Online?" Maya's stomach dropped. "What do you mean online?" David held up his phone. The screen showed a video titled, "War Veteran Destroys Professor in Class." The view count was already in the thousands and climbing rapidly. "I think you need to see this," he said. Reluctantly, Maya unlatched the chain and let him in. Her apartment felt even smaller with another person in it, especially someone who carried himself like a soldier. David looked around the sparse space with understanding rather than judgment. "Danny told me about you," he said without preamble. "In his letters, he said there was a young corporal who kept everyone's spirits up, who never backed down from a fight. He said you saved his life more times than he could count." Maya turned away. "Not the last time. The last time you held him while he died. That's what the medics told me. You stayed with him even though the building was coming down around you." David's voice was quiet but firm. "That matters." Maya pulled up the video on her own device. Comments were already flooding in. Some called her a hero for speaking truth to power. Others labeled her a war criminal who should be in prison. The divide was stark and ugly. "This is going to ruin everything," she whispered. "I came here to forget. To be normal. Normal is overrated," David said. "And forgetting isn't the same as healing." He sat down in her single chair, uninvited but not unwelcome. "I've been tracking the news about Kepler 442. The coalition is building a case based on Zephyrian testimony. They're painting humans as the aggressors, claiming we committed genocide." "We did commit genocide," Maya said bitterly. "That's what war is. The difference is we were defending ourselves. Not everyone sees it that way. The official narrative is that humans overreacted to a minor territorial dispute. They're saying the colonies could have been relocated peacefully." Maya stared at him in disbelief. "Relocated? David, they didn't want the planet. They wanted us dead, all of us. The Zephyrians see any non-Zephyrian species as a contamination that needs to be cleansed. Peaceful relocation was never an option. I know that. You know that. But the politicians who stayed safely on Earth don't want to admit they sent untrained civilians to fight a war they should have handled themselves." The video had reached 10,000 views. Maya watched in horror as her face was shared across social media platforms, dissected by strangers who had never held a weapon or watched friends die. "There's something else," David said carefully. "I wasn't just in that lecture by accident. I've been auditing Professor Williams's class for weeks, waiting for this topic to come up." Maya looked at him sharply. "Why? Because there are others like us. Veterans who came back to find that the war we fought is being rewritten by people who weren't there. They're gathering testimonies, building a counter-narrative, but they need someone who was there from the beginning. Someone who witnessed the initial attacks." "I'm not a spokesperson," Maya said quickly. "I just want to finish school and disappear." "That's not going to happen now," David said, gesturing at the phone. "This video is spreading too fast. By tomorrow, every news outlet in the coalition will know your name. You can either let them control your story, or you can tell it yourself." Maya sank onto her bed, feeling the weight of inevitability settling over her shoulders. 3 years of careful anonymity, destroyed in a moment of anger. But maybe David was right. Maybe some things were too important to keep hidden. "Who are these others?" she asked. David smiled for the first time since arriving. "People who understand that sometimes the only way to save lives is to take them. People who know that war isn't about heroes and villains, it's about protecting the people you love." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small device. "This is encrypted. If you decide you want to talk to them, activate it. If not, destroy it. Either way, I wanted you to know that you're not alone." As David left, Maya held the device in her palm. Outside her window, the city lights blurred together like stars. Somewhere out there, politicians were debating her future. Journalists were researching her past. And the galaxy was deciding whether humanity's first real test as a spacefaring species had been justified or criminal. Maya activated the device. A single message appeared. "Meeting tomorrow, 1900 hours. Location to follow. Come ready to remember." For the first time in 3 years, Maya Chen was no longer invisible. Now she had to decide what to do with that visibility. The warehouse sat in the industrial district of New Geneva, surrounded by empty lots and abandoned buildings. Maya checked the address 3 times before parking her beat-up hover car between rusted shipping containers. The encrypted device had led her here, to a place that looked like it had been forgotten by the city planners decades ago. She almost turned around. Maya had spent the day watching her video spread across the galaxy like wildfire. News outlets had picked up the story with headlines ranging from "Student Veteran Challenges War Narrative" to "Kepler Killer Exposed at University." Her university email was flooded with interview requests, death threats, and messages of support in equal measure. Professor Williams had sent a formal note requesting a meeting to discuss her outburst. Now, standing before a warehouse that might contain allies or enemies. Maya questioned every decision that had led her here. The side door opened before she could knock. A woman in her 40s appeared, wearing civilian clothes but carrying herself with unmistakable military bearing. Her right arm ended at the elbow, replaced by a sophisticated prosthetic that moved with fluid precision. "Maya Chen?" the woman asked. "I'm Colonel Sarah Martinez, retired. Thank you for coming." The warehouse interior had been converted into something resembling a meeting room. Folding chairs arranged in a circle, a portable projector, and a coffee station that looked like it had seen better days. But what struck Maya most were the people already seated and waiting. 12 individuals ranging in age from early 20s to late 50s. Some bore visible scars like her own. Others looked perfectly normal until you noticed the way they constantly scanned for exits, or how they kept their backs to walls. These were her people, whether she wanted to admit it or not. "Welcome to the Kepler 442 Veterans Truth Initiative," Colonel Martinez said as Maya took a seat. "We're not an official organization. We have no government backing, no corporate sponsors, and no political agenda beyond one simple goal: making sure the real story of our war gets told." A man in his 30s with a cybernetic eye spoke up. "The Coalition Senate is holding hearings next month. They're planning to condemn the human military response and possibly pursue criminal charges against surviving command staff." Maya recognized him from news footage, Captain James Foster, who had led the defense of New Beijing Colony. The man the media called the Butcher of Sector 7 for ordering the destruction of a Zephyrian breeding facility. "What they won't mention," Foster continued, "is that the facility was producing biological weapons specifically designed to target human DNA, or that it was located underneath an occupied civilian hospital." Colonel Martinez activated the projector. Images filled the air above them, holographic recordings that Maya remembered all too well. Zephyrian warriors standing over human corpses, children's bodies arranged in ritualistic patterns, entire settlements burned not for strategic value, but as acts of psychological warfare. These files were classified as soon as the war ended, Martinez explained. The Earth government decided that showing the galaxy what the Zephyrians really were would be inflammatory and counterproductive to galactic peace. A young woman across the circle leaned forward. "I'm Lieutenant Chen, no relation. I was at the Battle of Meridian Pass." She looked directly at Maya. "I saw what you did during the siege, how you held the communications center for 6 hours while waiting for reinforcement." Maya shifted uncomfortably. "I was just doing my job." "Your job was communications support," Chen replied. "Not single-handedly fighting off 3 Zephyrian assault teams while calling in artillery strikes on your own position." The memories came flooding back. The weight of the rifle in her hands, heavier than anything she had ever carried before, the sound of Zephyrian battle cries echoing through the tunnels. The moment she realized that help wasn't coming, and she was the only thing, standing between the enemy and 1,000 civilian refugees. "The Coalition wants to portray us as bloodthirsty killers," Martinez said. "They're painting the Zephyrians as misunderstood aliens who were simply defending their territory. But every person in this room knows the truth." She clicked to the next image, a Zephyrian plasma weapon specifically designed to cause maximum suffering rather than clean kills. Another image showed human prisoners who had been kept alive for weeks while being slowly dismembered. "The Zephyrians weren't defending territory," Foster said quietly. "They were conducting what they called species purification. They saw humans as a genetic aberration that needed to be corrected through elimination." Maya spoke for the first time since arriving. "So what's the plan? Release classified military footage? The Coalition will just say it's propaganda." An older man near the back raised his hand. "Admiral Wilson, formerly of the Kepler Defense Fleet. We're not just releasing footage. We're gathering testimony from every survivor we can find. Military personnel, civilians, medical staff, engineers, everyone who was there. And then what?" Maya asked. "Even if we can prove what really happened, do you think it will matter?" "The politicians have already decided what story they want to tell." The room fell silent. These were soldiers who had faced impossible odds and survived, but Maya could see the same doubt in their eyes that she felt in her heart. Colonel Martinez stood and walked to the center of the circle. "Maya, your video has been viewed over 1 million times in the past 24 hours. Do you know why it went viral?" Maya shook her head. because you weren't speaking as a soldier or a politician. You were speaking as someone who was there, someone who saw what really happened and refused to let it be erased. Martinez's voice grew stronger. For 3 years, the galaxy has been hearing one version of this story. Now they're hearing another. She clicked to a new slide showing social media analytics. Public opinion is shifting. People are asking questions about the official narrative. Journalists are digging into classified documents. Politicians are being forced to defend their version of events. Foster nodded. The coalition thought they could bury this story by classifying everything and painting us as war criminals. They didn't count on social media giving us a voice. Maya looked around the room at faces marked by war but not broken by it. These people had survived hell and returned to find themselves labeled as monsters. But they hadn't given up. They had found each other and were fighting back with the only weapon they had left, the truth. "What do you need from me?" she asked. Martinez smiled. "We need you to keep talking. The coalition hearing is next month. We want you to testify. I'm not a public speaker. I'm barely keeping it together in a university classroom." "You kept it together when it counted," Lieutenant Chen said. "When the stakes were life and death, you stood your ground. These hearings are just as important." Maya closed her eyes and thought about Danny Park dying in her arms, about the families she had helped evacuate from burning colonies, about the children who would never know their parents because the galaxy had decided their sacrifice was a war crime. "If I do this," she said slowly, "there's no going back. I'll never be invisible again." Admiral Wilson spoke from the back of the room. "Maya, invisibility is a luxury we lost the moment we picked up weapons to defend our people. But visibility can be a weapon too if we're brave enough to use it." Maya opened her eyes and looked at each face in turn. These were her brothers and sisters in arms, bound together by shared trauma and the burden of terrible knowledge. They had fought one war to save human lives. Now they were fighting another war to save human honor. "When do we start?" she asked. The warehouse erupted in subdued cheers and applause. For the first time since coming home from Kepler 442, Maya felt like she belonged somewhere. Outside, the city lights twinkled like distant stars. Somewhere among those lights, politicians were planning hearings and journalists were investigating stories. The galaxy was watching, waiting to see which version of the truth would prevail. Maya Chen was no longer invisible, and she was ready to fight. Maya's face was everywhere. News feeds, social media, protest signs, and wanted posters in equal measure. 2 weeks after the warehouse meeting, she had become the most recognizable human veteran in the galaxy. Some called her a hero, others called her a terrorist. She was learning that fame was its own kind of warfare. Her apartment had become uninhabitable. Journalists camped outside her building, protesters gathered in the street, and someone had tried to break in twice. The university had placed her on administrative leave for her own safety and the safety of other students. Maya now lived in a series of safe houses provided by the Veterans Network, moving every few days to stay ahead of both supporters and enemies. Today's safe house was a cabin in the mountains outside New Geneva. Snow crunched under her boots as she walked to the communications shed, where Colonel Martinez was coordinating their media campaign. The isolated location was perfect for planning their next move without interference. "Maya, we have a problem," Martinez said as she entered the shed. Multiple screens showed news feeds from across the coalition. The Zephyrian survivors are planning their own public testimony. On the main screen, a news anchor was interviewing 3 Zephyrians who claimed to be refugees from the destroyed homeworld. They looked almost human except for their pale blue skin and elongated skulls. They spoke perfect English with only slight accents. "We lost everything," one of them was saying. "Our families, our culture, our entire civilization." The humans showed no mercy, even to those who never fought against them. Maya stared at the screen in disbelief. "Those aren't refugees. That's Kazrix the Bloodless, one of their most notorious war leaders. He personally ordered the massacre at Harmony Station." Martinez paused the recording. "You're certain?" "I was there when we captured him. He spent 3 hours bragging about how many human children he had killed before the MPs dragged him away." Maya's hands clenched into fists. He was supposed to be in a coalition prison. Foster appeared in the doorway holding a tablet. He was, until 6 months ago, when he was mysteriously released as part of a prisoner exchange program that nobody can find any records of. The implications hit Maya like a physical blow. The coalition freed him specifically for this testimony. They're using war criminals to paint us as war criminals. It gets worse, Foster continued. Intelligence sources say the coalition has been coaching these refugees for months, teaching them human emotional responses, feeding them details about the conflict that only survivors would know. Martinez switched to another screen showing social media sentiment analysis. The Zephyrian testimony is having an impact. Public opinion is shifting back toward the official narrative. People are questioning your credibility. Maya studied the data. Comment sections were filled with doubt about her story, suggestions that she was suffering from combat trauma or had been brainwashed by military propaganda. The careful momentum they had built was crumbling. What about the other veterans? Maya asked. Can't they testify too? They're trying to discredit all of us, Foster said. Claims that we're a rogue military unit, that we're spreading disinformation to avoid prosecution. Half our people are being investigated by coalition security forces. Through the window, Maya could see David Park chopping firewood near the cabin. He had become her unofficial bodyguard, a role he took seriously despite her protests. His presence was one of the few things that kept her grounded as the world spiraled into chaos around her. There's something else, Martinez said quietly. We've been monitoring coalition communications. They're planning to issue arrest warrants for key witnesses before the hearings begin. Maya's blood went cold. Arrest warrants for what? War crimes, specifically targeting you, Foster, and Admiral Wilson. They're claiming you have information about classified military operations that could compromise coalition security. That's ridiculous. Everything we're talking about happened during combat operations that are already in the public record. Logic isn't the point, Foster said bitterly. The point is to silence us before we can testify. If we're sitting in coalition detention cells, we can't tell our side of the story. Maya walked to the window and stared out at the snow-covered mountains. 3 weeks ago, she had been an invisible student worried about passing her xenobiology exam. Now she was a wanted fugitive in a galactic political crisis. There has to be another way, she said. Some kind of evidence that can't be dismissed or covered up. Martinez and Foster exchanged glances. Actually, Martinez said slowly, there might be. She activated a new screen showing star charts of the Kepler 442 system. During the final assault on the Zephyrian homeworld, our forces recovered data cores from their military command centers, detailed records of their entire campaign against human colonies. I thought those were destroyed, Maya said. Officially they were, but Admiral Wilson made copies before the coalition ordered them classified. He's been sitting on them for 3 years waiting for the right moment. Foster nodded. The data cores contain communication logs, battle plans, and video records of Zephyrian operations, including footage of the attacks on civilian targets that the coalition claims never happened. Maya felt a spark of hope. That's proof. Undeniable proof of what really happened. There's a catch, Martinez said. The data is stored on Wilson's personal ship, which is currently impounded in coalition space. Getting to it would mean breaking several galactic laws. And if we're caught, it would confirm every accusation they've made about us being rogue military units. Foster added. Maya considered the options. Stay hidden and watch the truth be buried under Zephyrian propaganda and coalition politics, or risk everything to retrieve evidence that could vindicate them all. Outside, David finished splitting wood and began stacking it against the cabin wall. His movements were methodical, purposeful, like a soldier preparing for a long siege. How long until the arrest warrants are issued? Maya asked. 48 hours, maybe less, Martinez replied. Maya made her decision. Then we have 48 hours to get that data. Foster stared at her. Maya, this isn't a combat mission. We're talking about stealing from a coalition impound facility. If we're caught, we'll be arrested for theft instead of war crimes, Maya interrupted. And if we succeed, we'll have evidence that can save every veteran who served on Kepler 442. Martinez smiled grimly. Wilson's ship is at the Titan facility, heavily guarded. We'd need a team, equipment, and a way to get past coalition security without triggering a system-wide alert. I know someone who might help, Maya said, thinking of David's military connections. What about extraction? How do we get the data out once we have it? That's the easy part, Foster said. The hard part is staying alive long enough to use it. Maya looked out at the peaceful mountain landscape, knowing it might be the last peace she experienced for a long time. In 48 hours, she would either be a vindicated war hero or a galactic fugitive. There was no middle ground left. Start making plans, she said. And someone tell David to pack his gear. We're going to need all the help we can get. As Martinez and Foster began coordinating the operation, Maya felt the familiar weight of command settling on her shoulders. She had spent 3 years trying to forget that she was a soldier. Now it was time to remember what soldiers did when everything else failed. They adapted, they improvised, and they completed the mission, no matter the cost. The war for the truth of Kepler 442 was about to begin its final phase. The Coalition impound facility on Titan was a fortress of metal and ice. Massive automated defense systems protected thousands of confiscated vessels, ranging from smuggler ships to decommissioned military cruisers. Admiral Wilson's ship, the Meridian, sat in Section 7 Delta, surrounded by enough firepower to level a small city. Maya crouched in the maintenance tunnel 50 meters below the facility, watching security feeds on her tablet. Beside her, David checked his equipment one final time. Their strike team consisted of just 4 people: Maya, David, Foster, and a combat engineer named Rodriguez, who had volunteered despite sharing no relation to the Rodriguez who had died in Maya's unit. Security rotation changes in 3 minutes, Foster whispered through their comm system. That gives us a 12-minute window before the next patrol. Maya studied the facility layout on her screen. They had spent 36 hours planning this operation, using intelligence gathered by veterans still working within the Coalition military. The plan was simple in concept, nearly impossible in execution. Remember, we're not here to fight, Maya said into her comm. Get in, retrieve the data cores, get out. If we encounter resistance, we run. And if running isn't an option? Rodriguez asked. Maya checked her weapon, a non-lethal stunner that would incapacitate without killing. Then we adapt. The security patrol moved past their position right on schedule. Foster's hacking program activated, creating a temporary blind spot in the sensor network. Maya and her team emerged from the maintenance tunnel into the facility's lower level. The Meridian sat in its berth like a sleeping giant. Admiral Wilson had commanded this ship during the final battles of the Kepler conflict, leading the fleet that ended the war. Now it was a piece of evidence in the Coalition's case against human military leadership. David worked on the ship's external locks, while Maya kept watch. The facility's automated systems hummed around them, machines maintaining other machines in an endless cycle. There was something deeply unsettling about being surrounded by so much technology with so little human presence. Got it, David whispered. The ship's airlock cycled open with barely a sound. Inside the Meridian, emergency lighting cast everything in red shadows. Maya led them through corridors she remembered from her brief time aboard the ship during evacuation operations. The Admiral's quarters were located near the bridge, behind layers of military-grade security. Data cores should be in his personal safe, Foster said, connecting his tablet to the ship's computer system. Biometric locks, encryption keys, the works. Maya found the safe exactly where Wilson had told them it would be. A metal cube built into the bulkhead, protected by systems designed to resist everything from plasma torches to quantum hackers. Under normal circumstances, opening it would take weeks. But Maya wasn't using normal circumstances. She pulled out a small device that Wilson had given her during their final planning meeting. His personal authorization key, encoded with his DNA signature and command codes. Using it would constitute theft of classified military property, but that was the least of their legal problems now. The safe opened with a soft chime. Inside, 3 data storage devices sat in protective foam. Each one contained terabytes of information about Zephyrian military operations, communication intercepts, and detailed records of their attacks on human colonies. Got them, Maya said, carefully removing the devices. How are we doing on time? 7 minutes until the next security sweep, David reported from his position near the airlock. Maya sealed the data cores in a shielded case that would protect them from electromagnetic interference. These small devices contained evidence that could change the entire narrative of the Kepler conflict. Proof of Zephyrian atrocities, documentation of their genocidal intentions, and communications showing that they had rejected every human attempt at peaceful resolution. Maya, Foster said urgently, we have a problem. His tablet showed multiple security alerts flashing across the facility's network. Someone had discovered their intrusion earlier than expected. How much earlier? Maya asked. Security teams are converging on our position. ETA 3 minutes. Maya made the decision that had kept her alive through 18 months of war. New plan. David, Rodriguez, take the data and get to the extraction point. Foster and I will create a distraction. We're not leaving you, David said immediately. That's an order, Maya snapped, using the command voice that had once moved entire squads into action. The data is more important than any of us. Get it to Martinez and make sure it reaches the hearings. David hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Military discipline overrode personal feelings. He and Rodriguez took the data case and disappeared into the facility's service corridors. Maya and Foster moved toward the ship's bridge, away from the escape route. If they could trigger some of the Meridian systems, it might confuse the security response long enough for their teammates to get clear. You know we're probably not getting out of this, Foster said as they reached the bridge. Probably not, Maya agreed, activating the ship's communication array. But we knew that when we signed up. The bridge of the Meridian was a monument to human military engineering. Banks of computers, tactical displays, and command stations designed to coordinate fleet operations across multiple star systems. Maya had stood on bridges like this during the war, watching captains make decisions that determined who lived and who died. Foster connected his tablet to the ship's main computer. I'm uploading everything we couldn't fit on the data cores. Personnel records, after-action reports, medical files from the refugee camps. If they want to prosecute us, they'll have to do it with the complete record. Through the bridge's viewports, Maya could see security vehicles racing across the facility's landing platforms. Spotlights swept the area around the Meridian, searching for intruders. In minutes, this place would be swarming with coalition security forces. Upload complete, Foster said. Signals going out on every frequency the veterans' network monitors. Maya activated the ship's emergency beacon, adding their own message to the transmission. This is Corporal Maya Chen, service number HDF 7742 Delta. The evidence of what really happened at Kepler 442 is being transmitted on this frequency. To every veteran who served, every family who lost someone, and every person who wants to know the truth about our war. We were not the monsters they say we were. We were soldiers who did what soldiers do. We protected the innocent and fought for those who couldn't fight for themselves. Security forces breached the ship's airlock just as Maya finished speaking. Coalition troops in full combat armor, weapons trained on 2 people who had already laid down their arms. Hands where we can see them, the squad leader ordered. Maya and Foster complied, kneeling on the bridge with their fingers interlaced behind their heads. Through the comm system, Maya could hear David's voice confirming that he and Rodriguez had reached the extraction point with the data cores. Mission accomplished. Maya Chen, the squad leader said, checking his identification scanner. You're under arrest for theft of classified military property, unauthorized access to coalition facilities, and violation of the Galactic Security Act. I'm aware of the charges, Maya said calmly. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in Galactic Court. Maya almost smiled. They were arresting her using human legal traditions, as if she were a common criminal instead of a veteran trying to save her brothers and sisters from political persecution. I understand my rights, she said, but I want it on record that everything we took from this ship should have been public knowledge 3 years ago. The Coalition classified it to protect their own political interests, not galactic security. The squad leader didn't respond, but Maya caught him glancing at his recording equipment. Every word they spoke was being documented, adding to the growing pile of evidence that this entire situation was about politics rather than justice. As they led her off the Meridian in restraints, Maya looked back at the ship one last time. Admiral Wilson had commanded this vessel during humanity's darkest hour, leading fleets into impossible battles against an enemy that wanted nothing less than complete human extinction. Now it was evidence in a trial designed to vilify everyone who had served. But the truth was out there now. Data cores full of evidence, testimony from dozens of veterans, and recordings of Maya's own words spreading across the galaxy's communication networks. The Coalition could arrest her, prosecute her, even execute her. But they couldn't stop the truth from reaching people who were ready to hear it. Maya Chen was no longer invisible. Now she had to trust that visibility would be enough to save her people from being forgotten by history. The Coalition detention center on Luna was designed to be invisible. No windows, no natural light, and no contact with the outside world. Maya had been in solitary confinement for 2 weeks, waiting for her trial to begin. The only human contact came from guards who spoke to her in the clipped, professional tones reserved for dangerous criminals. She spent her time doing push-ups, sit-ups, and mental exercises designed to keep her mind sharp. The cell was 3 meters by 3 meters, barely large enough for a cot toilet and small table. It was luxury compared to some of the foxholes she had lived in during the war, but the isolation was wearing on her in ways that combat never had. Today was different. Instead of her usual meal delivery, a guard appeared with visitor authorization papers. "Chen, you have legal counsel," the guard announced, unlocking her cell door. Maya followed him through sterile corridors to a small room with a table and 2 chairs. Sitting across from where she would sit was a woman in her 60s wearing the formal robes of a coalition advocate. Her silver hair was pulled back severely, and her expression suggested she had seen too many cases like this one. "I'm Advocate Sarah Kim," the woman said as Maya sat down. "I've been assigned to represent you in your upcoming trial." Maya studied her lawyer's face, looking for signs of sympathy or understanding. She found only professional competence. "Let me guess. You're going to recommend I plead guilty to reduce charges in exchange for cooperation?" "Actually, no," Kim said, opening her briefcase. "I'm going to recommend we fight this case with everything we have." Maya blinked in surprise. "Why?" Kim pulled out a tablet and activated it. The screen showed news feeds from across the galaxy, all focused on the same story. Maya's data recovery mission had triggered a media firestorm that showed no signs of stopping. "Because in the 2 weeks since your arrest, public opinion has shifted dramatically," Kim explained. "The data you retrieved from Admiral Wilson's ship has been authenticated by independent experts. Every major news outlet in the Coalition is running stories about Zephyrian war crimes that were covered up." The tablet showed footage that Maya recognized from the data cores. Zephyrian warriors executing human prisoners, civilian settlements being burned for tactical advantage, children being used as test subjects for biological weapons. The images were horrific, but they were also undeniable proof of what the enemy had been capable of. "More importantly," Kim continued, "your fellow veterans have been coming forward in unprecedented numbers. Over 300 former Kepler 442 personnel have submitted sworn testimonies supporting your version of events." Maya felt something she hadn't experienced in weeks: hope. "What about the Coalition hearings? Are they still planning to prosecute military leadership?" "The hearings have been postponed indefinitely," Kim said with a slight smile. "It's hard to condemn human military actions when the evidence shows that the alternative would have been genocide." Kim activated another screen showing social media analytics. The hashtag #TruthForKepler442 was trending across multiple platforms. Videos of veteran testimonies were being shared millions of times. Public demonstrations supporting the human military were taking place on dozens of worlds. "The Coalition is in an impossible position," Kim explained. "They can't back down without admitting they've been lying for 3 years. But they can't proceed without looking like they're persecuting war heroes." Maya leaned back in her chair, trying to process this information. "So what happens to me?" "That depends on how willing you are to become the face of this movement," Kim said. "The prosecution is going to paint you as a rogue operative who stole classified information. We're going to argue that you're a patriot who risked everything to expose the truth." "I'm not a patriot," Maya said quietly. "I'm just someone who got tired of being called a war criminal for protecting innocent people." "Sometimes that's the same thing," Kim replied. "Maya, this trial isn't really about theft or unauthorized access. It's about whether humanity has the right to defend itself against extinction. Your actions on Kepler 442, your decision to speak out in that classroom, your mission to retrieve the data cores, they're all part of the same story." Kim showed her another screen, this one displaying messages from across the galaxy, veterans thanking Maya for giving them a voice. Families of Kepler 442 colonists expressing gratitude for her service, students from her own university demanding her reinstatement. "You said you wanted to be invisible," Kim said, "but sometimes the most important thing you can do is be seen." A guard knocked on the door, signaling that their time was almost up. Kim quickly gathered her materials and prepared to leave. "There's one more thing," she said. "David Park has been organizing a legal defense fund for you. Donations are coming in from around the galaxy. People want to help." Maya thought about David. probably working 18-hour days to coordinate support while she sat in a cell. Is he in trouble too? The coalition tried to issue arrest warrants for your entire team, Kim said. But public pressure forced them to back down. David and the others are free for now. After Kim left, Maya was escorted back to her cell. But the isolation felt different now. She wasn't alone anymore. Across the galaxy, people were fighting for her, supporting her, believing in her story. She thought about the path that had led her here. From an invisible student trying to forget her past to a galactic symbol of military resistance, every choice had seemed small at the time. Speaking up in class, attending the veterans meeting, volunteering for the data recovery mission. But together they had created something larger than herself. That night, Maya dreamed about Kepler 442, not the nightmare version that usually haunted her sleep, but the way it had been before the war. Blue skies, green forests, and children playing in settlement squares while their parents worked to build new lives among the stars. Those children were grown now, scattered across the galaxy. Some had become soldiers themselves. Others had become doctors, teachers, engineers, and artists. They were living the lives that Maya and her fellow veterans had fought to protect. When she woke, Maya made a decision. She would fight this trial with everything she had, not for herself, but for every veteran who had been labeled a war criminal for doing their duty, for every family that had lost someone defending human colonies, for every child who deserved to know the truth about what their parents had sacrificed to keep them safe. Maya Chen had been invisible once. Now she was ready to be the most visible person in the galaxy. The guard brought her breakfast an hour later. Along with the standard meal tray, he slipped her a small piece of paper. "From your friends," he said quietly before walking away. Maya unfolded the paper. It contained a single line written in David's handwriting. "The truth is winning." For the first time in 2 weeks, Maya smiled. Outside her cell, the coalition was discovering that some battles couldn't be won through political maneuvering or media manipulation. Some battles had to be fought in the light of day, with facts and testimony and the courage of people who refused to let their sacrifices be forgotten. The trial would begin soon. Maya was ready. The Coalition's Supreme Court was the most impressive building Maya had ever seen. Soaring crystal spires reached toward the artificial sky of the Luna City Dome, while holographic displays showed the flags of every member species. Representatives from across the galaxy had come to witness what the media was calling the trial of the century. Maya walked up the courthouse steps in restraints, flanked by security guards but no longer feeling like a prisoner. Thousands of supporters lined the route, holding signs and chanting her name. Veterans from dozens of conflicts, families of Kepler 442 colonists, and ordinary citizens who believed in the right to defend innocent life. Inside the courthouse, the main chamber buzzed with activity. Journalists, diplomats, and observers filled every available seat. The prosecution table was occupied by a team of coalition lawyers backed by several Zephyrian advisors. Maya noted that one of them was Kazrix the Bloodless, the war criminal who had been masquerading as a refugee. Advocate Kim met Maya at the defense table, along with a surprise addition to their legal team. "Maya, I'd like you to meet Admiral Rebecca Wilson," Kim said. "She's volunteered to serve as your military counsel." Admiral Wilson was a small woman with steel-gray hair and the kind of bearing that commanded respect without saying a word. Maya recognized her from news footage of the Kepler conflict's final battles. "Corporal Chen," Wilson said formally, "it's an honor to represent you." Maya started to salute, then remembered where she was. "Admiral, I thought you were facing charges yourself." "I was. The coalition dropped them yesterday when they realized that prosecuting the entire Kepler command structure would require admitting that every tactical decision we made was justified by enemy actions." Wilson's smile was sharp. "Amazing how legal strategies change when the evidence goes public." The trial began with opening statements. The lead prosecutor, a Centaurian named Vex 3, painted Maya as a dangerous rogue who had compromised galactic security for personal revenge. The defendant stands, accused of stealing classified military intelligence in a calculated effort to undermine legitimate coalition investigations. Vex 3 declared. Her actions were not those of a patriot, but of a criminal who placed her personal agenda above galactic law. When it was Kim's turn, she walked to the center of the chamber and spoke directly to the 5-judge panel. Your Honors, Maya Chen is not on trial for theft. She is on trial for telling the truth. For 3 years, the coalition has suppressed evidence of Zephyrian war crimes in order to maintain a false narrative of human aggression. Corporal Chen risked her freedom to ensure that evidence reached the galactic community. The prosecution's case relied heavily on technical violations and legal technicalities. They argued that Maya had violated her oath by accessing classified information without authorization. They claimed her actions had damaged coalition security and undermined diplomatic relations with Zephyrian survivors. But when Kim presented the defense case, the entire narrative shifted. "I call Admiral Rebecca Wilson to the stand," Kim announced. Wilson testified for 4 hours, methodically describing the Zephyrian campaign against human colonies. She presented evidence from the recovered data cores, showing that the Zephyrians had planned a complete extermination of human presence in their territorial sphere. The Zephyrian military doctrine was explicitly genocidal, Wilson explained. They didn't want our territory or resources. They wanted us extinct. Every tactical decision we made was in response to that reality. The prosecution tried to discredit Wilson's testimony by arguing that the data cores could have been fabricated. Kim's response was devastating. "I call Khazrix of the Bloodless Throne to the stand," she announced. The Zephyrian war leader had no choice but to testify. Under oath and facing charges of perjury in a galactic court, he was forced to admit the truth about his species' intentions. "Yes, we plan to eliminate the human presence," he said through a translator. "It was militarily necessary. Humans reproduce too quickly and adapt too easily. Left unchecked, they would have overrun our traditional territories within a generation." The courtroom erupted. Spectators shouted questions while journalists frantically transmitted updates. The judges called for order, but the damage was done. The coalition's key witness had just admitted to planning genocide. On the trial's 3rd day, Maya took the stand herself. "Corporal Chen," Kim began, "tell us about your service on Kepler 442. Maya spoke for 6 hours. She described arriving as a communications specialist and being thrust into combat when the Zephyrian invasion began. She talked about evacuating civilian settlements under enemy fire and holding defensive positions while families escaped to transport ships. "I was 19 years old," Maya said quietly. "I had never killed anyone before the war. I didn't want to kill anyone during the war. But when the alternative was watching children die, I did what had to be done." The prosecution's cross-examination was brutal. They questioned every tactical decision, every casualty report, every action that could be construed as excessive force. But Maya answered every question with the same steady honesty that had made her famous. "Did you enjoy killing Zephyrians?" the prosecutor asked. "No," Maya replied. "I hated it. Every single death. But I hated the thought of human children being used as target practice even more." "Do you believe you have the right to determine which species lives or dies?" "I believe I have the right to protect innocent people from those who want to murder them," Maya said. "If that makes me a war criminal, then I accept that label. But I won't apologize for saving lives." The trial's final day brought closing arguments. The prosecution made one last attempt to portray Maya as a dangerous extremist whose actions threatened galactic peace. Kim's closing argument was simple and devastating. "Your Honors, this trial is not about Maya Chen. It is about whether we will allow the truth to be buried for political convenience. The evidence is clear. The Zephyrians planned genocide. Human forces responded to defend innocent lives. Corporal Chen risked everything to ensure that truth was not lost to history." She gestured toward Maya, sitting straight in the defendant's chair. "Look at her. This is not a war criminal. This is a young woman who answered her people's call when they needed her most. She served with honor, returned home in peace, and only spoke out when that honor was threatened by lies." The judges deliberated for 18 hours. When they returned, the lead judge's expression was grave. "In the matter of Coalition versus Chen, on the charge of theft of classified military property, we find the defendant guilty." Maya's heart sank. But the judge wasn't finished. "However, this court finds that the defendant's actions were justified by extraordinary circumstances. The classification of the evidence in question was an abuse of coalition authority designed to suppress information vital to galactic understanding of recent conflicts." The judge looked directly at Maya. "Corporal Chen, this court sentences you to time served and immediate release." Furthermore, we recommend that the Coalition review its classification procedures to ensure that evidence of war crimes is never again suppressed for political purposes. The courtroom exploded in cheers. Supporters rushed forward as Maya's restraints were removed. David was the first to reach her, pulling her into a fierce hug that spoke of weeks of worry and fear. "You did it," he said. "You actually did it." But Maya was looking beyond the celebration, toward the journalists and diplomats who would carry this story across the galaxy. The trial was over, but the real work was just beginning. 6 months later, Maya stood in front of a different classroom. Not as a student this time, but as a professor at the Coalition War College. Her course on ethical decision-making in asymmetric conflicts was one of the most popular electives on campus. "War is not about heroes and villains," she told her students. "It's about people making impossible choices under terrible circumstances. Our job as future military leaders is to ensure that those choices are made with honor, courage, and respect for the innocent lives we're sworn to protect." A student raised her hand. "Professor Chen, do you think humans are naturally more aggressive than other species?" Maya considered the question carefully. "I think humans are naturally protective. When something threatens our families, our communities, our way of life, we respond with everything we have. That can look like aggression to outside observers, but it's really just love expressed through action." After class, Maya walked across campus to her office. The walls were covered with letters from veterans, pictures from former students, and commendations from military units across the galaxy. But the item she treasured most was a simple photograph of the Kepler 442 Memorial, where the names of every human who died in the conflict were carved in black stone. Maya Chen was no longer invisible. She was a teacher, a veteran, and a voice for those who couldn't speak for themselves. The galaxy had learned the truth about Kepler 442, but more importantly, it had learned something about humanity itself. When faced with extinction, humans didn't surrender. They didn't negotiate. They fought with everything they had to protect what mattered most. And when the fighting was over, they found ways to ensure that the sacrifices made were never forgotten.